History has some great heists. You may have heard of the Antwerp diamond heist, when a crew of thieves passed 10 layers of security and stole $100 million without triggering any of the 63 security cameras. Or there was the group in California in 1997 that held up a depot of armored trucks and stole $19 million. But nothing compares to the Great Republican Tax Heist of 2025, which is undoubtedly the greatest heist in human history. And like all great heists, this one is happening with simple deception, right in plain sight. Here's how it works. The House Republicans just put out a budget that would cut taxes by $4.5 trillion over the next 10 years, and Republicans are already going to the media saying that they're helping the working class by putting money back in their pockets. The budget would extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which were tax cuts from Trump's first term, that cut taxes almost exclusively for the top 1% in multinational corporations. When these tax cuts went into effect in 2018, the bottom 60% of income earners saved less than $500 on their tax bill, but the average family in the top 1% got a tax cut of $60,000 on average. The average family in the top 1/10 of 1% got an average tax cut of $250,000. The Trump tax cuts also created a 20% deduction for pass-through income, which is business income that goes to shareholders, and it doubled the estate tax exemption, allowing the ultra-rich to pass $22 million onto their heirs tax-free, as opposed to the $11 million that it did prior. But corporations got the biggest tax cut of anyone, with a permanent reduction in the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. In the 3 years after the Trump tax cuts passed, the 300 largest corporations in America paid $240 billion less in taxes than they would have had the tax cuts not passed. That's money that could have been used to build infrastructure, hospitals, schools, or just lower our taxes by $240 billion. But instead, congressional Republicans are trying to sell us on this idea that the rich actually didn't get enough tax cuts in Trump's first term, and that we should cut their taxes even further. Elon Musk tried to justify all these things in a press conference the other day, saying the Trump administration can do all this because they won the election, and that gives them a mandate to carry out the will of the voters. But I'm pretty sure when those of you who voted for Trump heard him talk about tax cuts on the campaign trail, you were hoping he would cut your taxes, not the taxes of C-suite executives running multinational corporations. But the kicker is how they plan on paying for these tax cuts, because if the government is taking in less money in taxes, they have to cut spending. So where do they want to cut spending? Take a guess. Take a wild guess what programs the billionaire-run Silicon Valley hedge fund oligarch administration wants to cut. Medicaid, SNAP, and public education. In other words, they want students and poor people to pay for the tax cuts for billionaires and the corporatocracy. That apparently is what America First is all about. By the way, they're aiming to cut anywhere from $1.5 to $2 trillion in spending, which is funny because that would still add up to $3 trillion to the national debt. This should make it absolutely clear that all of this rhetoric coming from the Trump administration about cutting the deficit and balancing the budget is just an excuse to cut social programs. They don't care about balancing the budget. And Republicans are already doing damage control on that front, saying that the tax cuts aren't really creating a $4 trillion hole in the budget because the wealth is eventually going to trickle down, meaning once we give the billionaires their tax cuts, we're supposed to believe that the money is somehow going to magically come back to us, like they're going to share their wealth with us, like we all know billionaires are notorious for doing. For all the trickle-down people out there, I want you to look at this graph. It's a graph that shows the relationship between tax rates on the rich and their share of the income. When the tax rate on the wealthy goes down, income inequality goes up. In other words, no, the rich aren't going to share their wealth with us, they're just going to keep it. Shocking, I know. In the last few years, Trump and the Republican Party have been rebranding themselves as the party of the working class, and they've done it fairly successfully in some areas. They've actually convinced people that lowering taxes on billionaires and cutting corporate regulations is somehow going to help the working class and not the billionaires. But the fact that they ran their whole campaign on this idea that they were going to put the people back in power, only to put a bunch of tech lords and Wall Street robber barons in place as soon as they got in office, should make it clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that America First and Make America Great Again are fraudulent, hollow slogans designed to hypnotize the American working class that's hanging on by a thread. And this is not to say that the Democrats are fighting Wall Street either. If you look at how the ultra-rich fared under either party, you'd see that there's really no difference. Trump gave the ultra-rich a massive $2 trillion tax cut during his first term, but under 4 years of Joe Biden's presidency, the top 0.1% increased their wealth by $6 trillion. And now Trump wants to take that and fire it into outer orbit with these tax cuts, which is probably why Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, once said that it doesn't matter who wins the presidential election. Whether you voted for Trump or Kamala Harris, the billionaires are screwing us all the same. And more it feels like this perpetual, arbitrary, 50-50 division between Democrat and Republican is actually an essential part of keeping the working class divided while the corporatocracy takes over our government. The truth is, we actually have way more in common than we have differences, specifically this common enemy. And with every passing day, the two sides get clearer and clearer. It's corporate America versus the working class. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that this status quo isn't sustainable. The question for us is, what do we do next? Should we be in charge of our own destiny, or will we continue to allow the billionaires to rule over us forever?